three different areas of your content: the opening, the body, and the closer. If we look at the opener, and for our purposes, I'm going to include the headline in the opener because that is really the most important part of your piece. You have got to grab the reader's attention and let him or her know exactly what they're going to get when they read this piece of content. Your opener is where you address the question of so what? So what? Why should I spend the next 5, 10, 15 minutes of my time reading this content? What's in it for me? Why is it going to benefit me? And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, we really need to meet readers where they are. So they start at a certain point. We want to take them to a certain point. So, we have an advantage over the reader in that we can see the big picture and we know where it's going, but we never want to slip into sounding condescending. We never want to tell the reader, okay, you hold this opinion, but you are wrong. And this is what's right, and I'm going to show you why. Because if we do that, we're going to turn them off right at that critical opening paragraph. So we need to say things like, oh, you think this about this issue? A lot of people think that, and it makes perfect sense, and here's why. And then move into what you have to teach them. So that's kind of a quick and dirty summary of the opener. From there, we get into the body of the piece. So this is the main course. If you think about the opener as the appetizer to kind of wake up your taste buds, the body is where we get into the main event, if you will, the main course. And this is where we start guiding the reader through those different proof points, those different content points that's going to get them to the finish line. And this is where we put on our attorney hat and pretend that we are making a case to a jury. So this is where we would bring forth things like statistics. This is where we would do things like talk about stories that guide the reader and get him or her more interested in coming to that finish line. And along this track, I would say we need to include at least 3 proof points to prove what we're talking about. 2 really, 1 or 2 is just not enough. And then, you don't want to go crazy with 17, 18 proof points. But, 3 is a good number, 3 or 4, maybe between 3 and 5, just to really drive your point home to your reader. So that's the body of the piece. And then we come to the closer. And on the slide for the closer, I actually had a picture of the scene from Lord of the Rings where Aragorn is getting the army pumped up for the final battle at Mordor. Because that's what the closer is. It's your marching orders. It's the final pep talk before sending your team out on the field. So that's where we really bring it all together for our readers. They've stuck with you. At this point, they've stuck with you through the opener, through all your different proof points in your body. And this is where you help them make sense of it all and really give them a call to action and make all this practical advice for them to use in their own lives. So that's kind of an overview of how to build the structure for that initial draft. And, I shared another tip in that one of my favorite approaches, especially if I'm writing a longer piece, is to just take random ideas that I want to get through. I want to talk about this statistic. I want to share this story, and just jot them down into individual index cards. And then sit down on the floor, make sure the dogs are safely stowed because they love this part. Now take my index cards and spread them out on the floor, and then group them into stacks. So I've got my opener stack, I've got my conclusion, my closer stack, and then I've got a stack for each proof point that I'm going to mention along the way. And that really helps because it helps me just get all the ideas out without worrying about where they go and then arrange them afterwards. And then when I'm ready to sit down and start writing, all I do is take my various stacks of index cards, I open my Word document and I start writing based on those index cards and just fill in the blanks as I go along. It actually works really, really, really well. So that's what we have to say about building your first draft. Then we come to editing and polishing. Now, I will say this about the draft. I find I write most effectively when my first draft is just bleh. Just get it all out there. Get all those ideas into your document. Don't worry about grammar. Don't worry about run-on sentences. Don't worry about massive paragraphs. Just get it out there. Because then we can come in afterwards and do a few rounds of editing to really make it crisp and clean and ready for prime time. So when I go through my editing process, I actually like to do 3 rounds. The first round, I look at structure. So are those ideas making sense? Are they leading into one another in a logical manner as I guide the reader from that starting point through the finish line? My second round of editing, I look at voice, tone, and style. And that's where I really insert myself into this content. I make sure that it sounds like me. Make sure that it aligns with the brand that I've created and all the content I've created over the years. And then the third thing I look at is where that third round of edits is where I really get into the granular details, the grammar, the punctuation, things like that. And I find that really serves me well because for that first draft, I can just relax and get my ideas out. And then once I'm done with that, and you'll know you're done when you run out of ideas, I can put on my editor hat and really focus on those details to really polish up that piece. So we did our first draft. We've done our editing. The last stage, and this is a critical stage, is the proofreading. Make sure that anything you put out there is proofread. And I shared a few strategies for this. One is reading the content aloud to yourself. That's something I do fairly often. I will print it out on a piece of paper and just read it out loud as if I were reading a speech. And that helps bring to light a lot of errors that I might have otherwise glossed over had I been reading silently. Another strategy is what we call the fresh eyes approach. So to get a trusted friend or colleague to read it for you. They will, they haven't spent any time with this content. So any errors are much more likely to become obvious to them as opposed to becoming obvious to you who have spent X amount of time with this content. And then the third strategy that you might want to consider is just hiring a professional. There are people out on Odesk and Elance and these other freelance sites who are professional proofreaders and who will be happy to help you proofread your work. So that's what we had to share about the editing and the proofreading of your piece. So that's kind of an overview of the process as I see it. And, do we have to follow this process exactly for every single piece of content? No. And, get time crunches given what they are. We might often not have the time to run through this entire process. But it does help. It is a guideline. And as you learn more and more as a writer, you might find that a lot of the approaches that we talked about just now, you just do instinctively because, we tend to write like along the lines of the things that we read. So you might, if you just sat down to write something, you would probably start with a very general statement and then lead into the more specific. So that's my advice on approaching your writing and really structuring it well and creating something that is useful and that's polished and that speaks to your readers. Okay, once we got that, I needed to lighten things up a little bit. So I shared 10 tips on writing from some of the world's great writers. And these were just kind of some random quotes on writing that I found from some of the most successful writers. Stephen King, "The road to hell is paved with adverbs." Okay. Stephen King hates adverbs. And his theory is that if you have to use an adverb and a verb or an adverb and an adjective, you can probably be more effective by just choosing a better verb or choosing a better adjective. Instead of saying he ran quickly, say he dashed. Or she spoke loudly, say she yelled. Very simple and very granular piece of advice, but one that I think you might find useful. Ernest Hemingway once said, "Write drunk, edit sober." And that kind of represents the approach that I just talked about, having that first draft just be bleh, just put it all out there, get those ideas down, go crazy, spell badly if it helps loosen up that creative process. And then once you're done with that, go back, put on the editor hat, sober up, quote unquote, and really look at things like structure and voice and tone and grammar. One of my favorite quotes from Hunter S. Thompson, he said, "Not a wasted word. That has been a main point to my literary thinking all my life. So make sure that every word serves a purpose." From J.K. Rowling of the Harry Potter series, "You have to resign yourself to the fact that you waste a lot of trees before you write anything you really like. And that's just the way it is." And I say this often, especially to people who are new to the I almost said craft there, shame on me, who are new to the business of writing, or who are new to writing in general. You're not going to walk on a basketball court and play like Michael Jordan the first day out. Writing it's a skill like any other. It needs to be honed, it needs to be practiced, and you will get better at it. From John Updike, "If it sounds like writing, I rewrite it. I can't allow what we learned in English composition to disrupt the sound and rhythm of the narrative." And this is what I tell people often. We're not writing term papers, okay? We need to be conversational. We need to write in a way that is, that's relatable, that doesn't sound like it's coming from a podium somewhere. We need to write like people talk, and if that means the occasional sentence fragment or ending sentences with a preposition, then so be it. We need to know the rules so that we can break them in the name of conversational content. Tom Clancy once said, "I do not over-intellectualize the production process. I try to keep it simple, tell the damn story." And that's a good reminder for when we want to complicate things. Just throw in proof points that really don't contribute, and it's just kind of excess. And Lord knows I can overcomplicate better than anybody else. And it's a struggle for me to really keep it simple, because the simple messages are often the most effective. Jack Kerouac once said, "Genius gives birth, talent delivers." Love that. Great advice from Ray Bradbury. He once said, "Just write every day of your life. Read intensely, then see what happens." From Mark Twain, "The difference between the almost right word and the right word is the difference between the lightning bug and the lightning." And then finally from Sylvia Plath, "And by the way, everything in life is writable about if you have the outgoing guts to do it and the imagination to improvise." So if you have got a topic that is bubbling away in your little brain that you're just dying to share, go for it. The worst that can happen is people write nasty comments about it. And I've had nasty comments on my stuff and have survived, and you can too. So that is a quick and dirty summary of what we talked about in our last VIP webinar. Like I said, we do have that replay available, and if you would like to have the link for that, let me know. Either send me a tweet or an email, and I will be happy to connect you with that. Okay, now it's time for our content marketing tip of the week. We talked about headlines very briefly in our webinar today. And so for today's tip, I want to talk about an unusual source for best practices in writing our headlines. And that source is your local newsstand, or your grocery checkout line, or the magazine section at Barnes & Noble. Take a look at your newsstand or wherever you happen to see these publications, and just notice. Take an observer standpoint and notice which headlines jump out at you. Which headlines grab your attention and just make you want to grab that magazine right off the shelf and devour it. And then start thinking how you can leverage those practices in titling your own content. So look at those headlines, figure out what it is that attracted you to them, or attracted you to them, and then see how you can use those best practices as you title your blog posts, your ebooks, and your other pieces of content. Okay, campers, that is it for me today. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Content Marketing Podcast. And thank you again to those of you who have helped us hit that 50,000 download milestone. If you like what you've heard today, please feel free to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher or via our RSS feed. And if you really like what you've heard, please leave us a quick review on iTunes. I would so appreciate it. For more information about content marketing, you're welcome to visit our website at resonancecontent.com, where you'll also find links to our pages on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and other social networks. As I mentioned, we also have our monthly VIP webinar series. The next one is not up yet, but if you would like to be on the mailing list for these so that you can sign up, just let me know, and I will put you on that list. So I just shared a bunch of great quotes with you as part of the webinar recap, and here is one more. Here is another one actually from Ernest Hemingway. He once said, quote, "If a writer knows enough about what he is writing about, he may omit things that he knows.